The security camera at Crestwood Beach would later show exactly what happened that Saturday morning at 8:14 a.m. A black woman in her early 60s walked slowly down the wooden boardwalk toward the water. She was wearing a simple black dress and flat shoes. In her hands, she carried a small bronze urn. She walked the way someone walks when their whole body is tired from grief. Careful, quiet. Like every step took effort. Her name was Denise Holloway, and she was carrying her husband's ashes to the ocean he loved. Officer Kyle Braddock spotted her from the parking lot. He had been on the force for 6 years and had already collected 9 complaints in his file, most of them for aggressive behavior during encounters with black residents in the area. Something about the woman on the beach caught his attention. He started walking toward her with purpose, his hand already resting on his belt. What this officer didn't know was that he had just made the worst mistake of his entire career. One decision that would cost him his job, his reputation, and $8.5 million of the city's money. The cameras were rolling. A jogger nearby had her phone out, and Officer Braddock was about to destroy everything he had built. Denise Holloway was 61 years old. She had been a high school principal for 22 years before retiring 2 years earlier. Before that, she taught English literature for 11 years at the same school. She was the kind of woman who remembered every student's name, even decades later. Parents trusted her. Teachers respected her. The entire community knew who she was. Her husband, Robert Holloway, had been even more well-known. Robert spent 35 years as a civil rights attorney, fighting cases that most lawyers wouldn't touch. He won landmark discrimination lawsuits against major corporations. He represented families who had no money and no hope. He did it because he believed the law was supposed to protect everyone, not just the people who could afford it. But Robert's legacy went beyond the courtroom. He was a philanthropist. He donated to schools, community centers, and local organizations across the county. And his biggest gift was Crestwood Beach itself. 20 years ago, the land was privately owned and closed off to the public. Robert purchased it for $2.3 million of his own money and donated it to the city with one condition. It had to remain open and free to everyone, forever. The city agreed. They put up a bronze plaque at the entrance that read, "Crestwood Beach, donated to the people of this city by Robert Holloway. May this shore belong to everyone." That plaque had been there for 20 years. It was the first thing you saw when you walked onto the beach. Officer Braddock had walked right past it. Robert passed away 3 weeks before this morning. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast. Denise was still in the deepest part of her grief when she drove to the beach that Saturday morning. She wanted to scatter his ashes in the water where they used to walk together every weekend for 30 years. It was the simplest, most personal goodbye she could think of. She wasn't looking for attention. She wasn't making a statement. She was just a widow saying goodbye to the man she loved, in the place he loved most. She had no idea what was about to happen to her. Denise had barely reached the shoreline when she heard footsteps crunching on the sand behind her. She turned around and saw an officer walking toward her. He was young, maybe early 30s, with a rigid posture and a jaw set tight like he had already made up his mind about something. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask if she was okay. Instead, he told her she needed to leave the beach immediately. His voice was sharp, not a request, a command. Denise looked at him confused. She asked if there was a problem. She explained that she was here to scatter her husband's ashes. She held up the bronze urn so he could see it clearly. She told him her husband had recently passed away and that this beach was his favorite place. Braddock barely looked at the urn. He told her that scattering anything on public property required a permit. He said she was in violation of a city ordinance and needed to leave or face arrest. His tone wasn't just firm, it was hostile, like she had done something wrong by being there. Denise stayed calm. She had spent 22 years as a principal dealing with difficult situations every single day. She knew how to keep her composure when someone was being unreasonable. She asked Braddock which ordinance she was violating. She asked to see his badge number. She told him politely but clearly that she had every right to be on this beach. Braddock didn't answer any of her questions. Instead, he stepped closer and told her again to put down the container and leave. He called it a container, not an urn, not her husband's ashes. A container, as if it meant nothing at all. Around them, the beach was quiet. It was early on a Saturday and only a few people were around. A white couple in their 40s was sitting on a blanket about 50 yards away with a cooler and a portable speaker. They had been there since before Denise arrived. Braddock hadn't said a word to them. A white man was throwing a ball for his dog near the water. No leash. Braddock hadn't looked at him twice. But a 61-year-old black woman holding an urn? That required immediate police intervention. Denise noticed all of this. She had trained herself to notice everything. It was part of surviving in a world that treated people like her differently every single day. She knew exactly what was happening. She had seen it before, many times, in many forms. But she never expected to experience it here. Not at Robert's beach, not while holding his ashes. She thought about Robert. He would have known exactly what to say in this moment. He had spent 35 years standing in courtrooms and looking people like Braddock in the eye and calmly, methodically dismantling every excuse they had. But Robert wasn't here anymore. He was in the urn she was holding, and the officer standing in front of her didn't even have the decency to acknowledge what it was. Braddock asked her where she lived. It was the kind of question that had nothing to do with beach regulations and everything to do with something else entirely. Denise told him she lived 12 minutes away. She had lived in this city for over 30 years. Braddock didn't write anything down. He didn't seem interested in the answer. He had already decided she didn't belong here, and nothing she said was going to change his mind. This was his first major mistake, and he didn't even realize the clock had started on his career ending. Braddock reached for his radio and called for backup. What he told dispatch was completely misleading. He reported an uncooperative individual refusing to comply with a lawful order on the beach. He described her as aggressive and potentially unstable. Anyone standing within 20 feet of Denise could see that this was a lie. She was a grieving widow in a black dress holding an urn. She had not raised her voice once. Denise heard what he said into the radio and felt her stomach drop. She had been around law enforcement long enough through Robert's work to know what a false report could lead to. She calmly told Braddock that what he just told dispatch was not true. She had been cooperative from the very first moment. She asked him again for his badge number and his name. He refused to give either. A jogger named Tamara Reed had been running along the boardwalk when she noticed the interaction. Something about it immediately felt wrong. The officer's body language was aggressive. The woman was clearly not a threat to anyone. Tamara slowed down, pulled out her phone, and started recording. She didn't say anything. She just held the phone up and let the camera capture everything. Braddock saw the phone. His whole demeanor shifted. He pointed at Tamara and told her to stop recording and mind her own business. Tamara calmly told him that she had the right to record a public official performing their duties in a public space. That answer made Braddock even angrier. He turned back to Denise and raised his voice. Type respect in the comments if you think this officer should have just let this woman scatter her husband's ashes in peace. He told Denise that if she didn't put the urn down and leave in the next 30 seconds, he would arrest her for disorderly conduct and trespassing. Denise looked at him and said something that shook him, even though her voice never went above a whisper. She said, "My husband donated this beach. His name is on the plaque you walked past to get here. You are standing on land that exists as public property because of him, and you're telling his widow she can't say goodbye to him here." Braddock hesitated for just a second. Then he did exactly what the framework of bad decisions predicts. Instead of pausing, instead of checking, instead of backing down, he doubled down. He told her he didn't care who donated what. Rules were rules. And then he reached for the urn. He actually reached for the urn containing her dead husband's ashes. Several witnesses later described that moment as the one that made their blood run cold. A police officer on a public beach, physically reaching for the cremated remains of a woman's husband while she stood there in a mourning dress. It was the kind of image that didn't need explanation. Everyone who saw it understood exactly what was happening. Denise pulled the urn close to her chest and stepped back. Her eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady. She told him he had no right to touch the urn. She told him she did not consent to any search or seizure of her personal property. Every word was precise. Every sentence was clear. 22 years of running a school had taught her how to stand her ground without ever losing control. This was Braddock's third massive mistake, and the consequences were piling up faster than he could possibly imagine. The jogger was still recording. The security camera on the boardwalk was capturing everything from a wide angle, and 2 more people on the beach had their phones out now, watching and filming. Braddock was creating a scene that would soon be seen by millions of people, and he had no idea. Backup arrived 4 minutes later. Officer Diana Torres and Officer Marcus Webb pulled up in a patrol car and walked down to the shoreline. Braddock immediately gave them his version of events. He told them the woman was refusing to leave, that she was being confrontational, and that she had made threatening statements. Torres looked at Denise. She saw a 61-year-old woman in a black dress clutching an urn to her chest with tears on her face. Nothing about this scene matched what Braddock had just described. Torres asked Braddock the obvious question. What exactly had this woman done wrong? Braddock said she was scattering substances on public property without a permit. Torres asked if she had actually scattered anything yet. Braddock paused. The answer was no. Denise hadn't scattered a single thing. She hadn't even opened the urn. Braddock had confronted her before she could do anything at all. Torres glanced at Webb. The look they exchanged said everything. This was a problem, a big one, and Braddock had created it entirely on his own. Denise spoke directly to Torres. Her voice was calm and measured. She gave her full name. She explained that her husband was Robert Holloway, the man who donated this beach to the city 20 years ago. She told Torres that the plaque at the entrance confirmed everything she was saying. She asked Torres to simply walk to the entrance and read it. Torres told Braddock to wait. She walked back up the boardwalk to the entrance. It took her less than 2 minutes. When she got there, she saw exactly what Denise had described. A large bronze plaque mounted on a stone base, impossible to miss if you were paying any attention at all. It read, "Crestwood Beach, donated to the people of this city by Robert Holloway. May this shore belong to everyone." Torres stood there for a moment, reading it twice, letting the full weight of what Braddock had done sink in. Then she turned around and walked back down to the shoreline with a very different look on her face. Webb had been watching quietly the entire time. He was newer on the force, only 2 years in, and he could see exactly where this was headed. He later told investigators that he knew from the first 30 seconds that Braddock was wrong, but he didn't know how to intervene without making things worse. That hesitation would haunt him, but it also saved his career. He never once supported Braddock's actions, and that distinction mattered when the investigation began. Do you think Braddock knew about the plaque the whole time and just didn't care? Or was he so focused on harassing this woman that he never even noticed it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Torres pulled Braddock aside and told him quietly that this needed to end right now. The woman's husband literally donated the beach. His name was on a bronze plaque that Braddock had walked right past. She told him to apologize and let her go. Braddock refused. He insisted he was following procedure and that the woman was still in violation regardless of who donated what. Torres stared at him for a long moment. Then she told him she was not going to be part of this. She walked back to Denise and told her she was free to do whatever she had come to do. Torres stood there respectfully while Denise walked to the water's edge. Denise opened the urn slowly. The wind was gentle and the ocean was calm. She whispered something no one else could hear, words meant only for Robert, and scattered his ashes into the waves. She stood there for a long time, watching the water carry him away. The morning sun was hitting the surface of the ocean and everything was golden and quiet. For that one moment, it was just Denise and Robert, the way it had been for 36 years. No badges, no confrontation, just a wife saying goodbye. Torres stood a respectful distance behind her, making sure nobody disturbed her. Even she had tears in her eyes. 2 of the witnesses on the beach later said that watching Denise scatter those ashes was one of the most powerful things they had ever seen. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was so simple and so human, and it almost didn't happen because of one officer's arrogance. When she finally turned around, she was composed, dignified, unbroken. She walked past Braddock without looking at him. She stopped near Torres and thanked her quietly. Then she asked Braddock one more time for his name and badge number. This time, Torres gave it to her. Torres also gave Denise her own name and badge number, along with the number for the department's Internal Affairs Division. Denise took her phone out and photographed the plaque at the entrance. She photographed Braddock's patrol car and its license plate. She wrote down everything calmly and methodically in a small notebook she pulled from her purse. She was building a case, and Braddock could only stand there and watch it happen. The jogger, Tamara, approached Denise in the parking lot afterward. She told Denise she had recorded the entire thing, all 9 minutes of it. She offered to send her the video. Denise thanked her and exchanged numbers. Braddock stood near his car, watching this all unfold. The arrogance was gone. Something in his face had shifted. It wasn't quite fear yet, but it was getting close. He had illegally threatened a grieving widow with arrest. He had tried to seize her husband's ashes. He had filed a misleading report with dispatch, and all of it was recorded on multiple cameras, including his own body camera that he seemed to have completely forgotten about. His career was over. and somewhere in his mind, Braddock had to know it. Tamara posted her video to social media that same afternoon. She wrote a detailed caption explaining what she witnessed: a police officer harassing a grieving black widow who was trying to scatter her husband's ashes on the very beach he had donated to the city. By that evening, the video had 4,000 views. By the next morning, it had over 3 million. By Monday, it was everywhere. Every major news outlet picked it up. The headline wrote itself: "Cop tells black widow she can't scatter ashes on beach her husband donated to the city." The outrage was immediate and massive. People from across the country flooded the police department's phone lines and social media pages demanding action. Community leaders held a press conference outside City Hall. Robert Holloway's legacy was well known in the area, and people were furious that his widow had been treated this way. The department released a generic statement saying they were aware of the incident and conducting an internal review. The public was not satisfied. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters the following day. They held signs with Robert Holloway's name on them. Some carried printouts of the plaque at the beach entrance. One sign read, "He gave us the beach. You harassed his widow." The image of that sign went viral on its own and was shared hundreds of thousands of times. Local businesses near the beach put up signs in their windows expressing support for Denise. A petition calling for Braddock's immediate termination collected over 92,000 signatures in 3 days. The pressure was enormous and growing by the hour. The police union initially released a statement defending Braddock, calling it a misunderstanding that was being taken out of context. The backlash was instant and brutal. Within hours, the union quietly deleted the statement from their website. They never mentioned Braddock publicly again. Then Braddock's history came out. 9 previous complaints in 6 years. 7 of them involved confrontations with black residents. 3 involved excessive force during stops where no crime had been committed. The department had noted some issues and sent him to additional training twice, but they never took real disciplinary action. A warning here, a note in his file there. Nothing that actually changed his behavior. More people came forward after the news broke. A black man in his 20s said Braddock had stopped him while he was jogging through a park and demanded to know where he lived. A black woman said Braddock had followed her through a parking lot and accused her of trying to break into a car that turned out to be her own. A black teenager said Braddock had told him he didn't belong in a neighborhood where his grandmother had lived for 40 years. The stories kept coming, and every single one of them painted the same picture. An officer who saw black people in public spaces and decided they didn't belong there. Type accountability in the comments if you think this is exactly the kind of pattern that should have been caught years ago. Denise gave one interview. She sat across from a reporter and spoke with the same calm authority she had used her entire career as an educator. She said she didn't want to be the face of this story. She wanted to grieve her husband in peace. But she felt obligated to speak out because if this could happen to her, the widow of the man who literally gave the city that beach, then what was happening to people who didn't have her resources or her name? She didn't yell. She didn't demand revenge. She simply told the truth and asked why it kept happening. That quiet power made the interview one of the most shared clips of the entire year. The internal investigation moved faster than anyone expected, mostly because the evidence was so overwhelming. Body camera footage, Tamara's video, the security camera from the boardwalk, statements from Torres and Webb, and dispatch recordings all told the exact same story. There was no ambiguity, no room for spin. 2 weeks after the incident, the department announced Braddock's termination. The official statement cited multiple violations: filing a misleading report, harassment of a civilian, failure to provide identification when requested, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The termination was immediate with no possibility of reinstatement. But losing his job was only the beginning. Denise's attorney, a longtime colleague of Robert's from the civil rights legal community, filed a federal lawsuit against Braddock personally and the city's police department. The charges included violation of civil rights under color of law, racial profiling, illegal threat of arrest without probable cause, attempted seizure of personal property, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The city's legal team initially tried to settle quietly. They offered $5,000. Denise's attorney rejected it immediately. This wasn't about a quick payout. This was about accountability. The case went to trial 8 months later. The courtroom was packed every single day. The evidence was presented methodically. Tamara's video was played in full. The body camera footage showed every second of the confrontation from Braddock's own perspective. Torres testified that she had told Braddock to stop and that he had refused. Webb confirmed the same thing. If you've made it this far, you're part of the solution. Subscribe and share this story so others can learn from it. Braddock's defense tried to argue that he was following standard procedure for enforcing park regulations. That argument collapsed the moment prosecutors showed that no such regulation existed for the situation he described. There was no ordinance requiring a permit to scatter ashes on a public beach in that city. Braddock had either made it up on the spot or was so poorly trained that he didn't know the laws he was supposed to enforce. Either way, it was indefensible. His attorney then tried to argue there was no racial motivation. Prosecutors presented the 9 previous complaints, 7 involving black residents, and called 3 of those previous victims to testify. Each one described an almost identical pattern: approached without cause, spoken to aggressively, treated like they didn't belong. The pattern was undeniable. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. They found in favor of Denise on every count. The damages were significant: $2.5 million in compensatory damages for emotional distress, humiliation, and the trauma of having her husband's memorial moment destroyed. $6 million in punitive damages against the city for their failure to address Braddock's documented pattern of behavior. Total, $8.5 million. When the foreman read the amount, there was an audible gasp in the courtroom. It was one of the largest settlements of its kind in the state's history. Legal analysts said the punitive damages reflected the jury's outrage not just at Braddock, but at a system that let him operate unchecked for 6 years despite clear warning signs. The city had 9 chances to stop this from happening. They ignored every single one. The judge, in reading the decision, said something that would be quoted in newspapers across the country. She said that a city that accepts the generosity of its residents but fails to protect their families from its own officers has fundamentally broken the social contract it was built on. Braddock showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but the color had drained from his face entirely. The man who had spent 6 years wearing a badge would now be remembered for this: for harassing a widow, for trying to take her husband's ashes, for standing on a beach that only existed because of the very family he was trying to remove from it. Braddock's police certification was permanently revoked. He could never work in law enforcement again, anywhere in the country. He was 32 years old, and the only career he had ever known was gone. His personal life fell apart quickly after that. Friends from the department stopped calling. Neighbors who recognized him from the news coverage avoided him in public. His social media accounts were flooded with messages from people across the country telling him exactly what they thought of him. He eventually deleted all of them and disappeared from public view entirely. For someone who had built his entire identity around wearing a badge, the loss was total. He wasn't just fired. He was erased from the profession he thought defined him. 3 supervisors who had reviewed his previous complaints and failed to take meaningful action were also disciplined. 1 was demoted from sergeant to patrol officer. 2 others were placed on unpaid suspension and reassigned to desk duty. The department was sending a clear message: ignoring problem officers would carry consequences. The city's police department was placed under an independent oversight agreement for 3 years. The agreement required new training programs on racial bias and de-escalation, a reformed complaint system with civilian review, and quarterly audits of officer conduct records to identify patterns before they escalated. Denise did not keep the $8.5 million for herself. She established the Robert Holloway Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding civil rights legal work for families who couldn't afford attorneys. In its first year, the foundation took on 14 cases. Robert would have been proud. She also worked with the city council to install a permanent memorial bench at Crestwood Beach in Robert's honor. The bench sits near the spot where she scattered his ashes, facing the ocean. The inscription reads, "For Robert, who believed the shore belongs to everyone." Tamara, the jogger who recorded the video, became an advocate for bystander accountability. She spoke at community events about the importance of recording police interactions and protecting people when something doesn't look right. Her video had been viewed over 28 million times. Officer Torres was quietly recognized within the department for her handling of the situation. She had done the right thing when it mattered, and that took courage. Not every officer in her position would have stood up to a colleague like that. Not every story like this ends with accountability. Not every victim has a name on a plaque or a video that goes viral. Not every officer faces real consequences. That is the uncomfortable truth that cases like this force us to confront. Denise Holloway wasn't looking for a fight that Saturday morning. She was looking for peace. She wanted to say goodbye to the man who had shared her life for 36 years, in the place where they made their happiest memories. That should have been simple. That should have been respected. That should have been left alone. Instead, an officer with a history of targeting black people decided that a grieving widow on a beach was a problem that needed to be solved. He didn't see a woman in mourning. He saw a black person in a space and decided she didn't belong there. The same thing he had done 9 times before, to 9 different people, in 9 different places. Robert Holloway spent 35 years fighting for justice. He donated millions of dollars to his community. He gave an entire beach to the public so that everyone could enjoy it. And his widow still wasn't safe from being harassed on that very same beach. That reality is hard to accept, but accepting it is the first step toward making sure it doesn't keep happening. This case mattered because it showed that accountability is possible when the evidence is clear, when bystanders step up, when good officers refuse to go along with bad ones, and when victims have the courage to fight back through the system. It also showed something that people don't talk about enough. Accountability almost never happens on its own. It took Tamara pulling out her phone. It took Torres walking to the plaque and refusing to go along with Braddock. It took Denise having the strength to document everything instead of just driving away. It took a legal team willing to take the case all the way to trial. Remove any one of those pieces, and Braddock probably would have gotten away with it, just like he got away with the 9 complaints before this one. That is the uncomfortable math of justice in situations like this. Everything has to line up, and it almost never does. It also mattered because of what Robert built. The beach is still there, it's still free, it's still open to everyone, and now, thanks to what Denise went through, it's protected by stronger oversight and a community that pays closer attention. Officer Kyle Braddock destroyed his own career the moment he decided that a black woman holding an urn on a beach was a threat. Every decision he made after that just made things worse. He had multiple chances to stop, to listen, to read the plaque he walked right past. He took none of them. In the end, justice was served. But the whole situation should never have been necessary in the first place. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story moved you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss a story like this. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what was the most shocking part of this story for you? I read every single comment, and I'll see you in the next one.